keep your eye out for that. That should be coming out hopefully tonight or tomorrow. And then if you guys are able to pick shifts up, just shoot him an email and he'll get you filled out. So with that, oh yeah, and renewals have also been sent out. So please try to get those in as soon as possible. So tonight we have Ashley Webb. She's going to be doing a presentation for us, and we have a quick bio for her before she begins. So Ashley received her BA in History and Anthropology from Longwood University in Farmville, Virginia, and her MA in Museum Studies from Bournemouth University in Dorset, England. She is currently the Curator of Collections and Exhibits and Acting Executive Director with the Historical Society of Western Virginia, which operates both the Roanoke History and the O. Winston Link Museums. In addition to her job with the Historical Society, Ashley works with several local museums as a contract museum collection specialist, including the Taubman Museum of Art and the Moss Art Center at Virginia Tech, and has guest curated exhibitions for the Salem Museum, the Harrison Museum of African American Culture, and Longwood Center for the Visual Arts. Her specialty is fashion, history, and she owns Bustle Textiles, a historic dress preservation company with an emphasis on creating traveling fashion exhibitions for small museums. And she also has a quick link for the museum that one of the museums she works at, the O. Winston Link Museum. The O. Winston Link Museum in Roanoke, Virginia is the repository of all negatives, equipment, sounds, and images associated with Mr. Link's famous work, documenting the last days of steam railroading and a vanishing way of life in America. The late 1950s were a time of great change in America, and Mr. Link's photographs of the trains, places, and people along the tracks of the Norfolk and Western Railway preserve this era with unmatched reality and humanity. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Ashley. Thank you for presenting for us tonight.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share. Oh, wait. Do you mind allowing me to share my screen?
Hold on one.
Sorry. Sure. So while they're figuring that out, I will say that O. Winston Link, he's from New York, but he did travel throughout rural Virginia a lot. And so a lot of the photographs you're going to be seeing are from rural Virginia, Western Virginia, and some parts of North Carolina. So just keep that in mind as we're talking about all the photographs. Hold on a second.
When you get a sec, Ashley, try sharing your screen now.
What was that? Sorry.
Go ahead and try sharing your screen
Nope.
now.
It still says host disabled. Sorry. This happened earlier and Sean got it figured out, but I don't know what he did on his end.
It's under security. You click on that, and then it says allow sharing.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Again,
David.
folks, just stay muted. We appreciate the help.
So yeah, while they're working on that, if any of you have not been down to Roanoke, Virginia, where the O. Winston Link Museum is located, please do come visit. We're a little town, but we're pretty big for the western side of the state, and we have a really great downtown. We've got lots of arts and culture, museums, and other events. I think it's like a 14-hour drive from Portland, Maine. So it's a little bit of ways away from you all, but definitely on if you want to visit Virginia, it should be one of your stops for sure.
And don't forget,
611. Yeah, it's at the Virginia Museum of Transportation, which is just down the road from us. We do not own it at our museum, but we have a lot of people come visit. So
she's kept in operating condition, and she has been used for special excursion service. I got to see the 611 at Strasbourg.
that's awesome.
Yeah,
Garland,
I
we're
was
gonna
a
ask you to mute
fireman.
now. Garland, we're gonna ask you to mute now if you don't mind, please. Just...
Oh, sorry.
Nope, you're good, buddy.
I will also say you are, at some point within this presentation tonight, you are probably going to be hearing my cats. They like to make as much noise as possible when I'm trying to give presentations. So I have 4 cats. Their names are Tristan, Pippin, Lizzie, and Bingley. So I'm sure you'll be hearing one of them at some point.
No worries.
They're adorable.
Should have asked Sean to tell me what he did to fix this. That's my bad. Sorry, guys.
I would be able to help you. Called one of our IT guys. He's looking. Who does the Zoom with us?
Can't get into all your settings while you're actively in the Zoom meeting, so that might be why.
He had the Zoom left open.
Yeah, but you're in a meeting, right?
Yeah.
So being in a meeting means that you can't change. I don't know if you can change security settings when you're in a meeting. I might be able to change her to admin.
Close out.
Here,
All right.
sharing option. Okay, you should be all set.
Jackson, is everybody all set there now? Yes, it looks like.
Looks
We're
like-
good.
looks
Thank
like
you
we
very
got it.
much.
All right, I'm going to make Firehouse the host. Like I said, I gotta get out of here, so.
Okay, we're good. Go get dirty.
Great.
All right, see you.
Thank you all so much for working on that. I really appreciate it. So yeah, so as he mentioned, I am the curator with the Historical Society of Western Virginia, which is both the parent organization for the Roanoke History Museum and the Owenston Link Museum. And this basically means we're 3 museums under one roof. And I'm sure almost every single one of you all have heard of or know of some of Link's most iconic works, especially if you're involved with the railroad or know anything about nighttime train photography. And so while Link did not create this specific genre of photography, he certainly has influenced countless others, and his influence is still felt today, 70 years later. So in tonight's presentation, I hope to leave you with a few things. First, a little more knowledge about O. Winston Link, why his work was so influential, as well as how his planning, his tinkering, and his technical prowess created this amazing body of work, which he called the Norfolk and Western Project. And the 611 is featured, that the J class is featured heavily in these photographs. Ogle Winston Link was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1914 to Anne Winston Jones and Ernest Albert Link. Although Link remained a New Yorker for the majority of his life and even maintained the Brooklyn accent and attitude, his parents weren't originally New Yorkers. In fact, his father was born in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia near Harper's Ferry, and his mother was born near Richmond, Virginia. These Appalachian connections created an affection for the rural communities that the NNW project would use in its backdrop. He was the middle child of 3, and his father's occupation as a manual arts teacher at a New York City school encouraged Link's love for the arts, as well as for photography. His father really encouraged him to use his hands and to think through problems and problem solving. Here's an image of him and his father on the left-hand side with some bird houses that they had made when he was young. And he is not the youngest boy in the picture, but the one on the far right, with his mother, sister, and then younger brother, Albert. While his photography experience was fairly limited, he did have a knack for creating difficult technical projects. In 1932, Link created a special camera using his father's old folding camera in order to take photographs of a solar eclipse. And in both of these photographs, you can see the folding camera. He took a pair of binoculars and made that the lens. And then he had a plate glass negative on the back to try and capture this solar eclipse. He entered the photographs and the camera in a citywide competition, science fair, displayed at the National History Museum in New York. And he actually won first place in this competition. This technical engineering is something he continued for the rest of his life, and attempting to better his own photography equipment, cameras, tripods, flash equipment, and the like. Link graduated from Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute in 1937 with a degree in civil engineering. He had been class president for 3 years and photographic editor of the school newspaper. He did not have, as I mentioned before, he did not have a lot of photographic experience growing up. So everything that he did later on in his life, it's all self-taught pretty much. In 1937, the United States was still in the throes of the Depression, so Link did not find a position open in his field of civil engineering. Instead, he took a photography position with the large public relations firm Carl Bayer and Associates. Bayer worked for several high-profile clients, and Link was hired to create catchy product photographs so they'd be published in magazines and newspapers. This particular photograph advertises Tough Flex glass, and one that Link created under his tenure at Bayer. So what you're basically seeing is a model standing on several blocks of ice, which is separated by a roaring fire with a sheet of Tough Flex glass. And this ad was meant to be startling and to enforce the brand's assertion that it could, quote, withstand fire and ice. He had a lot of catchy ads and very startling ads like this one that he created in the 1930s and 40s. But a lot of the ideology and symbolism that he used to convey these advertisements and these messages has really been lost today. Link often went on assignment for Bayer in Louisiana and Texas, and many of his early photographs showcased Louisiana life in the late 1930s and early 1940s. Rice harvesting, beekeeping, alligator hunting, shrimp boating, and a lot of photographs like that. We have only a few negatives and prints of these in our collection, but most of these are made in Louisiana with Link's son. The image at the right-hand side of the screen was taken in Port Sulphur, Louisiana, and it was one of the first night train images that Link had taken with the use of flash photography. So that was 1946. So that's kind of setting the stage for what he did with the Norfolk and Western project later on. It was in Louisiana that he met Martial Oglesby, a model and actress. They met on the set of The Buccaneer in 1937, where Martial was the body double for the female lead in the film. They married in 1942, but they unfortunately divorced in 1947. They did have one son, Conway, who still lives in Louisiana. With World War II on the horizon, Link left Bayer and joined Columbia University's Airborne Instruments Laboratory in New York. He was partially deaf and so was deemed unfit for the military, which is why he did not serve. Instead, he helped the laboratory work on confidential projects such as creating airborne submarine detectors. It was in this position that Link learned technical aspects such as lighting and capturing large and quickly moving objects like the plane in this image. These also, again, would influence his later projects. This F-89 in flight is one he took with all of these factors combined. I think this might have been either at dusk, twilight, one of the wee hours where the lighting was kind of key at this point. If you look at the notebook on the left, there are these are some of the notes that Link kept in relation to this image. He kept detailed notes of all of his pictures, of who was in the photographs, how it was set up, exposures and f-stop settings, and even something so mundane as how much he paid for his lunch. Basically anything relating to that image, so he could try and recreate it again if he needed to. It's unclear exactly what Link did for the lab, but he found that the Long Island Railroad was a short distance away from his location. And so he would often head there to photograph in his time off. And it was during this time at the lab, in 1946, he had started with that one nighttime train image. But in a little bit earlier, a little bit later than that, he started to envision this full-scale nighttime photography project using steam trains. And I think this image from his time while working at the lab of the Long Island Railroad is particularly important because it's taken from a relatively high angle. And especially during the Norfolk and Western project, even in a lot of his commercial photographs, he is known for his unique angles and how he photographed his subjects and the trains and the automobiles and whatever he was really working on. He was known for his unique compositions. Oops. After the war, Bayer offered him a position, but instead he decided to create his own commercial photography business. Over the course of his commercial career, he photographed for Texaco, Ethel, B.F. Goodrich, Kaiser Fraser Corporation, and many others. So now we're going to fast forward to 1955. Link was in Stanton, Virginia on a commercial photography project and decided to drive to nearby Waynesboro, which is like half an hour away from Stanton. And while there, he fell in love with the antiquated charm, which you see in this photograph. This is Troy Humphreys, one of the station agents at the Waynesboro station. And Link he was just walking around, saw the cracked window, the outdated technology. Troy is using telegraph equipment from the 1920s. And so he loved the whole romance of the situation. He felt like he'd stepped back in time. So after striking up a conversation with the station agent, he made him feel very welcome. And Troy actually invited him to come back the next night. And so Link took him up on that offer. So this is the first image that really started the Norfolk and Western project. It was taken on January 21st, 1955, as N&W's train number 2, northbound from Roanoke to Hagerstown, Maryland, arrived in Waynesboro. And as I mentioned earlier, in the early 1940s, mid-1940s, Link was kind of percolating this idea of capturing steam trains at night, and he wasn't really sure how he could do it. At this point in time, almost all railroads had begun phasing steam engines out of service in favor of diesel. The Norfolk and Western was the last to switch, and so Link decided from this night on January 21st, 1955, that he would plan to document these engines. He took 7 images that night, that first night, and then went back to New York the next day because his commercial project was over. And he began to plan. He wanted to capture the everyday goings on of life along the line, what it took to maintain these engines and the trains themselves against the backdrop of their rural communities. This image, I feel like it was taken much later in the project, but I think it captures this whole ideal pretty much wholeheartedly. It's probably one of my favorite Link photographs, only because I like landscapes. The color aspect of it is amazing. And a lot of the technology you see in this photograph, you know, you've got the horse-drawn wagon with the corn husks and the individuals sitting and sorting. That's a landscape you don't see anymore, especially in rural Virginia. You might have the cornfields, but you're not going to have people actually out there with the wagons, the horse-drawn wagons working. And this scene actually in Watauga, the railroad no longer runs through there. So it's not very changed, but it's pretty much non-existent at this point. So after his first night photography of photographing that image in 1955, Link began planning, as I mentioned. He decided to completely self-fund this project, documenting as much as he could before the steam trains blinked out of existence. He armed himself with train timetables, maps of all the rail lines, and took several journeys via train to scout locations. He was still living in New York City, and this is in his studio in New York. And he's mapping out routes for potential photo locations on some of his trips. And as I mentioned earlier, the NNW was one of the last lines to maintain a regular schedule of steam passenger and steam freight along its 4 lines, all of which emanated at Roanoke. So Roanoke was the hub for Norfolk and Western ever since the mid-1880s, I believe. These, of course, connected to other bigger lines to New York, to Columbus, Cincinnati, and then farther south, and then going into the west. But he chose primarily to focus on the Shenandoah Division, the Radford Division, and the Pocahontas Division, as the mountainous Appalachian landscape provided a better backdrop than the flat expanse of Roanoke to Norfolk, which was the Norfolk Division over to the coast. Over the course of 5 years, Link made 17 trips up and down the Norfolk and Western lines from New York and took over 2,200 photographs in this project. So in the notebook on the right, you'll see crossed out pages. In many of Link's early notebooks documenting the NNW project, he wrote down photo ideas, train schedule, and how best to photograph those spots. He worked religiously off of the train schedule, so he knew exactly what time the freight was coming through, what time the passenger trains were coming through, and that way he could capture the best possible photograph amongst all of the different trains that were coming through the area. On the left-hand side, you'll see a letter to Ben Delaney. He was Norfolk and Western's public relations manager. And Ben loved the idea of Link's documentation, and he fully supported the project, allowing him access to sites, the ability to converse with engineers and conductors in real time along the line, and even to stop and reposition locomotives for the images. So in the letter at the left, Link details the route he planned to take, along with the photographs he was planning to capture on his 3rd trip in 1955. Ben was a real asset to Link. They conversed a lot, and they became really close friends throughout this whole process. So on the 2nd trip down from New York, Link focused on the people who lovingly maintained the locomotives at the Bristol, Bluefield, and Roanoke shops. Both of these images are from the shops in Roanoke. And Roanoke was kind of a unique case back then. Ever since its creation in 1882, they made all of the locomotives on site. Unfortunately, Norfolk Southern, it transitioned into that in the 1980s, but unfortunately Norfolk Southern no longer has a hub in Roanoke, but it was a big deal all the way up through steam and beyond. So these images not only detail the people that worked on and maintained the trains, but it also showcases the sheer size of these machines. And Link was really fascinated by that. He was really fascinated by the mechanical workings of the locomotives, as well as what care it took to keep them maintained. In many of Link's photographs, the locomotive is in the background, not necessarily as an afterthought, but with a planned scene in the foreground, like this variation of sometime the electricity fails in Vesuvius, Virginia. I think this was purposeful in many cases to illustrate the indifference of the people and how the train blends into the background because of the consistency it had on their daily lives. In this variation, you see more to the image than just the gas pump and W.A. Miller in the immediate foreground. You have the couple who later married in the Buick, which that is Link's Buick. And then you have the little boy at the far right with Bert the horse. And I thought that was a dog until I had to magnify it on my computer screen to actually see, but it is a little miniature pony. In others, the train is the focus of the larger landscape. One of Link's favorite places to photograph was on the Blue Ridge grade seen here, and that's just outside of Roanoke. It was a large stretch of ascending track through the mountains, and it took 2 locomotives to pull freight up the Blue Ridge grade. It was an area along the line that the steam freights could really showcase their power, and Link loved this. At one time, he had said the Blue Ridge grade was his favorite place to photograph, and his joy is evident when he made sound recordings and film recordings along this stretch of the railroad. Link's most iconic work is of nighttime train photography, like this one here of Main Line on Main Street in North Fork, West Virginia, which, by the way, if you were to go look at North Fork, West Virginia today, none of this exists anymore. It's literally just a mountainside, grassy mountainside with the train tracks running beside it. I don't even know if the train tracks are even there anymore, but unfortunately. But Link also did a number of color works, most notably along the Abington branch line. And the Abington branch itself did not have an evening train, so Link decided to capture what he could during the day. Not all of his color works were done on this line, but the majority were. And so the image on the right, so he would set up, and I'll talk about this more in a minute, he would set up 2 cameras, one in color, one in black and white. And what you're seeing on the right-hand side, that is not an AI generated colorized image. That is his actual color negative of the same scene on the left. He once commented that the trains were black, the coal was black, the night was black. So what am I supposed to do with color? And so in the 1950s, it was a very new technology. And this is another reason why he mainly focused on black and white photography. He knew the parameters of the black and white film. He knew how to develop it. He knew how it was going to turn out. Plus, as he said, all the trains are black. There's not a lot of variation, but when he does do color, I think they're absolutely fantastic. Just as an aside with this image in particular, this is the Husk Nella Depot. And like many of the rural lines in Virginia, the depot also acted as the post office, the general store, and the Western Union office where they received the telegraphs. To the post office, it was Husk, but it was Nella on the NNW's timetable. And the story that was told that the station stop here originally been named Allen in recognition of a railroad official, but it was then noted that there was another Allen on the line. So they simply just spelled it backwards. And that's how Nella came about. No one seems to know why the railroad just didn't call it Husk. And this little establishment had a dog named Jimbo that Link coined the Hound of Husk. And Jimbo would sit on the steps outside the post office and he would howl whenever a train would come by. And I think Jimbo is actually featured in one of Link's sound recordings of the train coming through Nella Husk area. But I digress on that. Fortunately for us, he did take a lot of color images along the Abington branch, and the black and whites are great, as I said before, but the color ones just add so much punch of beauty. This is in Tuckerdale, North Carolina. Unlike today, where you could take an image and easily convert it to a black and white photograph, or even do an AI rendering of, colorize an image, Link did not have that option. He had to set up 2 different cameras, and you can see this is a really good image where they're slightly they're set up side by side, but they're slightly different angles of the same image. This is of Green Cove, and that station is actually still there today. If you are considering coming to Virginia, definitely go down on the Creeper Trail in Abington, Virginia. The tracks have been converted to the rails to trails, so you can walk along that. Green Cove has been restored, and it's a great little depot to go and visit. The angles are so subtle on this that you would just assume it's the same camera taking the image. But if you look at the far right of the color image, you can actually see where a little bit more portion of the side of the building is present. And then on the black and white one, you can't see the trees at the far left. As I mentioned, Link took a total of 17 trips through Shenandoah over a span of 5 years to photograph the last of the steam engines. He was not only on a personal agenda to document as much as he could, but he was also on a huge time crunch. By 1957, only 2 years after he started the project, only one or two lines were left running steam. Since he was funding this himself, he had to get the maximum impact out of each trip and out of each image he took. He used a 4x5 graphic view film camera, and he only had one shot to get the image he needed. He mentioned early on in this process that he would set the entire scene up and hope that the train was in the right spot, his lights didn't misfire, or that it didn't get overexposed in any way. In many cases, he'd have to wait until he got back to New York after the entire trip to process the film and see if it turned out well. And later on, he had a couple of misfires and the negatives didn't turn out great. So later on, he then decided to rent a trailer and process the negatives on the spot. In order to create the night images he's so known for, there was a lot of planning and setup beforehand. He had a lot of miles of cables, several flash units to set up, plus all of his cameras. In many cases, the bulbs misfired, cables got sliced that he had to repair. And in one instance, the proprietor where they were photographing charged them $1 a minute for electricity in the 1950s. It was at this point that Link decided he needed to create something so he wouldn't have to rely on others for this electricity. So this is Link here on the left-hand side with one of his assistants, George Tom. They're set up in their studio in New York at this point, but this is kind of to give you an idea of how much cable he had, how many, of course, this is only 3 of his flash units, bigger flash units. He has a number of smaller ones there too, but it was quite a process to set everything up. And I'll talk a little more about that in a few minutes. So in the 1957 and before, he had been tinkering with creating some sort of power supply, even as early as 1940. But after that particular incident with the woman I just mentioned, he focused more on getting this technical detail finalized so he wouldn't have to rely on somebody else. And it was with this particular photograph that he was able to create something. So in 1958, he submitted this image to an international photography contest and won 2nd place. So with the prize money, he purchased a converter. He devised that he could use 2 12-volt lead acid batteries to supply 115 volts of power at 60 cycles, supplying power through a series circuit. Completely portable, it was light and durable, and with tin terminals to prevent broken or loose connections while out on a shoot. Here you can see George Tom on the kneeling on the ground, one of Link's assistants, and he's using this battery pack in this behind the scenes image of Luray Crossing. And I just want to also point out, so you've got George on the far right kneeling, you've got Link behind the 2 cameras, and then Archie Stover, who was the crossing guard for Luray, which is in Shenandoah Valley area of Virginia. And so Link has 2 cameras out, but there's also a camera photographing him. So that's 3 cameras just for one shot. Link also designed a number of tripod and flash equipment to be used while out shooting. On the right, we have the design for a portable tripod head, which would lock the legs of the tripod in place to prevent sliding when setting it up on glass or marble. In his notarized letter about this piece, he explained, by rotating the knurl plate 7, spur gear 9, which the numbers those are the ones that are circled on the far right-hand side, By rotating the neural plate 7, spur gear 9 drives 3 smaller spurs, 1 mounted on the same shaft as a bevel gear 2. Bevel gear 2 rotates bevel gear 3, which is fixed to shaft bolt 4. When shaft bolt 4 turns, it tightens itself against the tripod leg 5, which is hinged about shaft bolt 4. The system of gears is designed so that all 3 legs are tightened at the same time by the same amount. And he goes on about this and all the other numbers and how they relate to the locking and the panning of the camera and the tripod itself. And then the image on the left, that didn't actually come with a notarized letter. So I'm not exactly sure of all the technical details that it's trying to explain. But I'm guessing it has something to do with his flash equipment. As you can tell from both of these, he was extremely detailed, and the technical engineering of these is absolutely insane. I kind of can't really comprehend how he figured all this stuff out. He was very territorial over his techniques and designs. And when he created things like this for potential patents, he had them notarized, he made copies, and then sent the copies to himself via registered mail. And I think he did want to help the photo community at large. But I don't think any of his works were actually patented or ever mass produced because he was so secretive about it all. And I don't think he wanted anybody to steal his ideas. So I mentioned that Link had planned everything out, and he had this vision in 1955, even before he began shooting his photographs. After that first image in Waynesboro, he began following the tracks in his spare time, looking for picturesque or unique spots to photograph. So on the right, you actually see one example of this. Some of these sections didn't actually make it into the any of his shots. So if you look on the left-hand side, Millwood, there's he mentions that there's a graveyard. Check this for winter shot. We don't have any shots of Millwood. The NG, I think, means not good. White Post, there's a nice big tree at the rear of the station. There, we don't have a White Post shot. Same thing with Rileyville. So he had all these ideas, but he didn't follow through on every single one. And then on the left-hand side, he again writes to Ben Delaney, who was Norfolk and Western's PR rep, and a copy of that. That's basically a copy of what he sent to Ben. He did not keep any of the originals. We have some of the originals from some people he talked to, but he basically made copies of everything. So in addition to writing to Ben and trying to map everything out, he began writing to contacts in the area where he was photographing, sending copies of magazines, more information on his project, and letting others know about the cooperation and backing of the railroad. And then he would go on to ask if he could stage a scene in which to photograph. And so this is basically what you're seeing here. You've got a copy of Link's letter to the Grottoes fire chief in Grottoes, Virginia, alongside the return reply giving consent. Then he would map out where his camera, reflectors, and other items were to be staged against the railroad. All the little colored half circles in this image, here, 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 and then over here are his flash units. And then the squiggly little item over here in the lower right corner, that is the camera, the triangle, his field of view. And if you look at where the units are placed, the flash units, you will always notice they are just out of sight of this field of view. He made sure the single-use bulbs he was using for the reflectors would have enough power to light the objects he wanted to be seen. And if you look at this diagram, and then pick out where the lights are placed, and then you look at the final image, you begin to see how genius his techniques really, really were. This nice shot is, in particular, looks like it's almost as if it's been taken during the day, with the illumination and how little shadow everything gives off. The only telltale sign that it's not is the ink black sky of ink black night sky. And so if you remember, he had flash bulbs behind this little garage here. So that's what you're seeing. Here's the flash units for those. He again kept really detailed records on who was in these images. So we actually have all the listing of everybody here. And actually, we had the Grotto's fire truck. It's been recently restored at an event at our place in August. So it was really cool to be able to see a piece that was in some of Link's photographs. He would also enlist the help of other station agents on these shots. For his images in Luray, he sent ahead flash bulbs, which were single use. So he wouldn't have to carry more in his car from New York. So he'd pack his car up, drive all the way down to Virginia. And then, the flash bulbs, once you use them once, you'd have to throw them away. So by having the cooperation and assistance of these station agents, he'd be able to pack his car lighter and then keep moving on without having to acquire so much stuff. These are actually both images from later trips down the Shenandoah. And this is Link's Buick on the right-hand side. And how he fit everything in that 1952 convertible is beyond me. But he did keep a detailed listing of what went where in his car, just so I guess he wouldn't forget anything and make sure it was all in place when he was leaving. He did mention in one letter that all of his equipment combined weighed about 150 pounds. So in addition to sending letters ahead and mapping, Link also usually took photographs during the day. In this instance with Hawksbill Creek and Luray, he has done this very thing. So another reason he preferred nighttime photography was that there was a lot of unsightly things you spotted during the day that you could then obscure or ignore at night with carefully placed lights. This is another instance where you have both black and white film as well as color film. Two cameras to capture the same image. So Link would get the lay of the land during the day, scope out where his lights would need to be positioned, set everything up, and then in many cases wait until dark. So again, you see that just the slightly different angles of the building, of the train. I think they're taken a few seconds apart as well, but it's essentially the same area. So here you have the layout of Hawksbill Creek. Link arranged the Judd children to be playing, have them playing in the creek, and I'm pretty sure that's them, right? These little dots right here in the creek that's running. This is the railroad track, so you have a light with that. This is the overpass, I'm pretty sure. And so it's adding to more to the image than just that train. He really liked the human aspect. So again, all of these were staged, but he made them look like they were not. So here you see the setup, part of the setup for the Hawksbill Creek image. The flashes are out of sight. And in this case, I actually believe one of the flashes misfired, the one that was up here on the other side of the overpass. I believe that misfired. We do have a letter from Link to an individual stating they would have to retake this particular image from the previous summer, but it doesn't give the reason why. But I mean, you can't see the train. So that's what I'm thinking why he felt this was not a successful image. So here is the final reshoot in 1956. Again, you see different children. I'm turning my screen like you can see it, but you have different children in the first image versus in the second image. So this is Link's most famous image, and it's called Hot Shot Eastbound at the Jaeger Drive-In. And I actually just found out it wasn't taken in Jaeger, just the drive-in was called the Jaeger Drive-In. This is in West Virginia. And unfortunately, I have heard that this is basically just a parking lot now. There's nothing there, which is really sad. But just like others, his other photographs, he began to writing to all the parties involved prior to his visit, determining if the theater owners would be amenable to him setting up and photographing on their property as the train passes. He states he's making a series of photographs showing a steam railroad operating at night. And so while traveling on the train, he says all this in his letter. While traveling over the NNW lines, he noticed the entire parking area and a screen built inside the curve of the railroad. So you've got the screen here. So the curve of the railroad just goes right around behind it. So you got the screen. And from the bridge over the stream, it looked as though he could get a good shot over the tops of the cars, showing a train rounding the bend to the right of the screen. So here are all the cars. Here's his camera, the one car that he wants to focus on in the very front. And the train would come around this bend while he's photographing. And honestly, in the picture, in this drawing, I had no idea that there was a stream anywhere near this setup. So having his letter to put with the diagrams and then the actual photograph gives it a lot more context, which is fantastic. He continues, the picture would show the cars, the screen, and the train, and how far was the bridge away from the screen. In his mind, I think he was thinking about how much cable he'd have to have and have to use to get everything settled, as well as how many flash units he'd have to space. The Jaeger drive-in replied that it was 600 feet. So if you're looking at his diagram and how he wanted to set it up, you see all the cable feet. So 40 feet here, you got 60 feet, 80, 180 feet. Oh, that's the train. Sorry. This is the train length here. But you'd have 40 feet of cabling, just this far to get to his flash units. So this is basically where he wanted the train to stop, and then where he wanted to put each of his lights. So again, you've got the camera, you've got all the little half circles as the lights. In another letter to Jaeger Drive-In, he relayed the setup information, asked if they had a ladder, and then also asked if they knew of a nice-looking couple, around 20 or so, but that he'd be photographing the backs of their heads. So he didn't really need to, notice if they were that good looking, but he would like for them to be good looking, and that he would use his own convertible for the couple. So here's the first negative of the shoot. You can see all of his flash units, which for him is very rare to actually have them in the shot. And this is one of the few images that I don't think he could actually hide them. So, and as you can see, the movie screen on this image is blank. And that is basically because when he took the photograph, the screen itself got washed out from all the lights of his flash units. So he had to photograph the screen several times, which is what you're seeing here in all of these little, these contact print negatives. He then chose one of the images to create a contact print in order to create the new negative. So the movie that was playing that night was Battle Taxi. It was a 1955 Korean War drama. And what you're seeing in these images, all the little specks and stuff, that is actually not, that's not a scratch negative. That is actually lights glinting off all the sides of the cars throughout the parking lot. So here you've got the little audio stand, you've got the side mirror in the car and all of these. So again, that's not a scratch negative, which I think is really cool to note that. And so then here is the final image, and you can't tell it, but this is the actual copy that he created the negative from for the final print. So Link used an early form of Photoshop, scissors and glue to place the movie screen, the little image he cut out from a contact print onto this piece. So you can kind of see like it's not quite lined up here, but that is actually, he just basically glued it onto the print to create a new negative. So the last behind the scenes image that I wanted to talk about is Goose Deck Dam over Amari River. This image took 6 days to set up and was probably one of the most complicated images for Link to capture. So here you see an image of the train tracks behind the dam, and a pretty good illustration of how wide it was across and the sheer feat of capturing this image. So here you have his mock-up. This line running through here, let's see, where is it? No, I'm all turned around. So we've got the train tracks here. I'm pretty sure this is his camera down here. I think this is the dam itself to the little powerhouse. So you've got his field of view going towards here. He wanted the train to be set up on just right back here with the, so you've got all of his lights here. So you've got the dam in the foreground and then the train in the very, very background. So in this page in the lower right-hand side, he details each day. So yeah, just down here in the lower right-hand corner. He says Tuesday, look it over. Wednesday, set up half day. Thursday, set up all day. Friday, complete connections and up all night. Saturday, set up and make 2 images. Sunday, clean up. The up all night bit was probably to identify what trains that would be coming through, the regularity of them, what kind of schedule they kept, basically so that way they could then pinpoint which locomotive they wanted to capture, because the train pretty much had a regular schedule. So they knew if they knew the J class was coming in at this time and it had a passenger trains attached to it, that might look good. So they kept track of that in all of their notes. So 6 days of setup. What did this look like? So first they had to haul in their equipment, which you actually can see that down here on the rocks. So the road was back up this way and they were trying to get across so they could have the dam just in the foreground with the tracks. Second, they began running a cable across the Maury River to act as a tightrope. And I think they actually have one of their luggage bits going across on the tightrope at this point. They ended up creating a top wire and a bottom wire, like a tight rope, to help steady themselves and take additional things across the river. And here you can see all of the wire that they had to use to create the top and the bottom, and you've got the dam in the background. So they then created a pulley system with a string to help keep the flash equipment cabling elevated and out of the water. So here's that. You can see the little pulley system. This is the electrical cable. Some of it looks like it's dangerously close to getting in the water. But so they basically had, I think that might be one of them in the tree. Yes, there's someone in the tree over there helping to pull everything across. So then they strung this cabling across. Yes, I just mentioned that. Yep. So then they had to walk across this tightrope with all their equipment. So they created a makeshift little ladder on one of the trees and then started hauling all of their stuff. And here's both Link and Tom. You can only carry so much at one time. So they took several trips back and forth. They did not document how many trips, but I'm sure it took quite a lot. And then as he mentioned in his notes, they stayed out all night. This was pretty much a regular occurrence for him. He would often stake out the day or night before in order to determine what trains came by, and whether they were steam or diesel, and then what would be best to photograph. So he would often set up tents like this, have fires going, and basically have little campouts. He photographed mostly in the winter. So a lot of his images, they were on his breaks. He must have had a lot of good contracts, but they're mostly on like Christmas breaks, spring breaks, things like that, where you see him in a lot of winter coats and bundled up for the weather. So then he finally set up his cameras. You can see those here. Again, he had George Tom, taking a photograph of him photographing. So this is just kind of giving you an idea of how he set up this one shot. And this was the resulting image. So it's really hard to tell how much work went into creating this image because the vantage point looks as if it's just right off the side of the road. If you look closely, you can see where his lights are pointing at the train, all the curvature of the distribution of the light. This particular image was taken in March of 1956, so still fairly early on in the project. He was still trying to figure out the best situations, how to use his lights, how to get all of the electricity out to everything. So for him to do this so early on and have a great image, it's a huge technical feat. So this is one of the pages of Link's notebooks detailing his expenses for the trip. And this was just a few days prior to set up. And as you can see, rope, soldering iron, gloves, boots, and some other things were all bought and prepped for this particular image. He spent 13 days along the Shenandoah line for this particular trip, 6 of which were set up for this. Link spent around $860 just on this portion of the trip. And one inflation calculator equated this to $9,933. So, as I mentioned, he completely self-funded this entire project, all these 17 trips to Virginia, staying in motels, eating out. So he definitely had some good contracts to be able to take several weeks off and to be able to fund several trips, 17 to be exact, through the Shenandoah Valley. Link photographed all the way up to the end of when steam was fully removed from the Norfolk Western lines in May of 1960. In many instances, the towns that depended so regularly on the trains disappeared as freight and passenger services changed. And this is actually an image of one of the diesel trains that Norfolk and Western then started phasing in as early as 1957. So many of the communities, locations, and even the tracks themselves have disappeared from the modern landscape, which is why it makes these photographs so important today. It's a composite history of rural Appalachia when America was phasing out of one technology and into another, forever changing how people did business, how they interacted, and how the train interacted in the landscape itself. And I actually love this image of individuals waiting for the creeper in Green Cove, which is along the Abington line. Mainly because, again, this was where you sent your telegrams, where you got your mail, you sent your post, where you caught up on all the gossip, and that's where you did your shopping too. So these were really essentially community hubs. And with the loss of the trains in these areas, this lifestyle and this community gathering disappeared. So fast forwarding, he was not really known until 1983 in the art community. In 1982, he actually met a woman named Conchita. This would have been his second marriage, and he was in his 60s, she was in her 40s, and they got married. He was super happy, but then he actually got married in this train station, by the way. That's just a fun little anecdote. So they got married at Green Cove, and then pretty quickly into the marriage, I think in 1992, he tried to file for divorce. She had started telling people that he had Alzheimer's. She locked him up in the basement, trying to make him get prints done, so then she could then sell them. Apparently, at this point in time, I think he was having trouble walking, and so she took the handrail out of the basement, so he could not get up the stairs. She started squirreling away payments for prints, for sale. She started calling the galleries and wanting to communicate with her solely because she didn't want Link learning about any of the shady dealings that she was doing. And eventually, she did steal the majority of his prints, his camera equipment. But luckily, Link gave his negatives to a close friend. So she did not take any of his negatives from the Norfolk and Western project. In 1996, they did get divorced. They did get divorced in 1992. In 1996, she was convicted after stealing about $1 million worth of his equipment and photographs, and was released in 2001. But unfortunately, she began reselling things on eBay in 2003, and she ended up being caught with her an affair she had with the gentleman who actually knew Link as well. And she had a 20-year sentence after that. So I think she has actually been released by now. I think we're a year or two out of that. But unfortunately for Link, this kind of persisted throughout the rest of his life. He died in 2001, ironically, outside of a train station in New York. He was trying to get to the hospital because he was having a heart attack and passed away just outside of a train station as a train was passing by. So not a really happy ending for him in terms of his wife and all of that. But he did get a museum created. So before he passed away in 2001, he was in talks of creating a museum for his photographs. Now, like I said earlier, he was not really discovered until the 1980s. So from 1955 to 1960, he was solely working on this project. And then 1960 to 1983, he was trying to get things published in Railfan magazine, in Norfolk and Western magazine, and other related pieces. I think he had a couple of things in like the New York Times, but he wasn't really known that well. And so in 1983, the Museum of Modern Art in New York kind of discovered him. They bought 5 of his prints, and it kind of snowballed from there. So fast forward to 2001, before he passed away, he was in talks with individuals in Roanoke to create a museum. This is where we are located. This is the Norfolk and Western Passenger Station. It's actually a Raymond Loewy design building. And if you don't know who Raymond Loewy is, I'm sure you know of his work, maybe not him himself, but he created like the Nabisco logo, the Coke bottle, supposedly Air Force One for JFK. He designed that, the Studebakers, the Pennsylvania Railroad locomotive. So just a really big industrial designer. So this building is actually Raymond Loewy designed, 1949. And we are part of that building. It is a purpose-built, the museum is purpose-built in the bottom of that museum, or of that building, I guess. So it opened in 2004. Norfolk and Western donated the passenger station to the city of Roanoke, and passenger service ended actually in 1971. So this building was used as offices after that for a while. And so with the help of Link and his estate, the museum was built in the basement. And today, it pretty much looks exactly the same on the exterior and the interior as it did in the 1950s when Link photographed. And on the left-hand side, you can actually see this is Link standing in front of the train schedule, and that train schedule is still up. Of course, the back of the building has been kind of chopped off because the concourse no longer goes over the train tracks. It's not a functioning passenger station anymore, but it still carries on that name. So thank you for listening with me. Thank you so much for 470 Railroad Club for having me on. And if you are interested in coming to Virginia to visit us, we're open Tuesdays through Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And come visit us in Virginia.
So much for presenting for us tonight. If you don't mind, we're going to open up to if people have any questions.
Of course.
People out in Zoom land have any questions, please feel free to ask. We're going to try to refrain from comments, but if we just have some questions, now's the time. We're going to set the timer for no more than 10 minutes. Cool. Well, again, Ashley, thank you. What I think we'll do, so if people, again, do go down your way in the United States, we'll add the museum links and we'll send them out to the members. So then.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. I know my family, we go down to Pennsylvania each year, so this might be a new spot we might go check out. But on that note, we're not having any questions. So we'll let you go. And again, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Have a great night, everybody.
And we are calling it a night. Thank you all on Zoom land. We appreciate it. Have a good night.